Hey everyone, Jake here from CVP, and today we'll be taking a look at Panasonic's first camera featuring phase detect autofocus. This is the brand new S5 II, and on paper it looks to provide loads of bang for your buck. But is it too little too late from Panasonic? Well, in this video we'll be putting the S5 II through some creative and technical testing and discussing whether or not the S5 II is what everyone has been waiting for from Panasonic. Let's get into it. The camera we have with us is an early sample that Panasonic have sent to us to check out, and it has been incredibly reliable so far given it's such an early unit. The original S5 already offered a great blend of features and image quality, especially at its recent price point. The S5 II takes everything great from the S5 but improves in several key areas while still sitting at a very good price point of just £1,999 for the body only. We'll take a look at how it sits amongst its competition a bit later on. But before even getting into the specs of the sensor, let's just talk about by far the biggest headline feature in the S5 II, the addition of phase detection to Panasonic's existing contrast-based autofocus system. This new system uses both phase and contrast detection in tandem, which means performance is improved over previous Panasonic systems, which were just contrast-based. You can enable human, face and eye, or animal and human subject detection on top of your regular autofocus mode. The tracking will then kick in, which is really obvious on screen. There are a bunch of different modes and tweaks that I don't want to get into in this video, but I've put a link to a fantastic video covering the AF modes and settings in the description below. However, I do think it's worth understanding the AF custom setting for video. This allows you to dial in the AF speed, which is just your speed of focus, and then AF sensitivity, which is how sensitive the camera is to switching subjects depending on the mode you are in. In each mode, you can then enable the modes we mentioned earlier, which will then prioritize these over the focusing mode. It's worth mentioning that human and face and eye are very different. Face and eye will only focus on faces and eyes, and will not track humans when it doesn't recognize faces or eyes. And this means if you turn your head or turn around, it will focus on something else depending on the mode you are in. In my opinion, for the best results, you need to use human tracking, and honestly, I don't know why anyone would use face and eye over it. Human mode in this camera behaves similarly to face and eye modes in other camera systems. It will prioritize faces and eyes when they are in frame, but also track the backs of heads and bodies. So this is the mode I would suggest running if you are mainly filming people. In the regular tracking mode, you can either touch what you want to use or use the joystick and shutter to enable tracking onto a chosen subject, which can also be an object. You can also touch to focus on any mode, which does make focusing easy to do. Anyway, let's take a look at how the camera performs up against the Sony a7 IV. For these comparisons, we grabbed a Sony and Panasonic 16-35 for each camera and matched their field of view and aperture. The S5 II was in human tracking mode, and so was the a7 IV, with both speeds and responsivenesses on each camera set to their defaults, and in this mode they looked very comparable. The Panasonic tracks really well and does a great job at holding onto our subject. Even when using the Panasonic 50mm f1.4 at f1.4, we can see the camera does a really great job of sticking onto its subject and keeping it in focus. This new autofocus system is so much better than Panasonic's previous iterations, and I can't wait to see it in more of their cameras. This system is decently reliable now, but I need to spend some more time with it to give a more concrete opinion, but this really is an impressive update from Panasonic. Though we did experience some inconsistencies, and that's not surprising given that this is their first version of this system. As expected, the S5 II uses L-mount, which means you have a growing range of both Panasonic-made and third-party lenses, as well as the option to adapt. So we grabbed an MC21 and a Canon 16-35 to see how it performed, and unlike previous Panasonic cameras, the S5 II can use its adapter and EF lenses in continuous autofocus, which is great to see. It works really well from our testing, but I really want to try it out with some more lenses, especially from Sigma, to see the differences between running adapted glass versus native. I would also love to see a face-only mode, as currently there isn't a way to enable this. Even in tracking mode, as soon as the subject goes out of frame, it focuses on something else, regardless of how locked on it is set to. If you want us to do any further testing, let us know in the comments below. Right, before we get into the spec of the camera, let's check out what kind of imagery we can capture with it. managed to shoot a decent range of creative footage with the S5 II, and unsurprisingly, the images the camera can capture are great. It can be a bit noisy straight out of camera, with Vlog's default 0 noise reduction, but some tweaking in camera or processing in post can help with that. Colours are great, dynamic range looks solid, and autofocus as a whole was pretty decent. However, we did run into focusing issues with the Sigma 100-400, which really struggled while filming some wildlife. This could be an issue with the firmware of the lens though, which hopefully it is, as it was pretty frustrating to use. We're actually using the S5 II to record this piece of camera right now, so let us know how you think it looks in the comments below. The S5 II has a new full-frame 24 megapixel sensor paired with a new processing engine, and it has a maximum usable resolution of 5952 by 3968 in its 6K 3x2 mode, which gives it a pixel pitch of roughly 5.94 microns and a rated 14 plus stops of dynamic range. It doesn't have an OLPF like the S1H, which isn't too surprising. For our Latitude tests, we only had the A7 IV to compare it to, as we are currently refreshing our showroom stock. Ideally, we would have compared it to the GH6, the original S5, Pocket 6K and the Fujifilm X-H2S. But we actually looked at a few of these in a previous video recently, so if you want to know how they perform, check that video out. Anyway, here's a quick breakdown of our testing methodology. Pause it if you want to read it. And if you want to see the full uncut test that we've shot, head over to our Vimeo for the full cut. Right, let's take a look at how the S5 II performs. When it comes to overexposure, both cameras perform very similarly. They look good up to around 4 stops overexposed, where we can start to see Sam's skin getting a bit funky. At 5 stops, I do think the S5 II hangs onto saturation a bit better, especially on skin tones on the chart. However, if we look at our underexposure shots, the Sony performs better. The Sony's colours are more neutral with a slight purple shift, whereas the S5 II shifts more green. Saturation and detail are also much better towards the lower stops with the Sony than with the Panasonic. So really they both perform better in different areas here. When it comes to rolling shutter performance, I wasn't expecting it to be fantastic due to the frame rates available, and it performs alright. When whip panning, you can definitely see lines skewing. We also wanted to see how it compared to the A7 IV in this regard as well, as this is one of the most spoken about drawbacks of the A7 IV. Compared to the A7 IV, the S5 II does look better with less pronounced jello. I really do hope though when they bring out an S1H Mark II or an S2 or whatever the next step up is, that the sensor used in that has a slightly faster readout speed. The S5 II features a dual native ISO, which changes depending on the gamma you are shooting in. In normal gammas it is 100 and 640, in Cinelight D2 and V2 it's 200 and 1250, in HLG it's 400 and 2500, and in Vlog it's 640 and 4000. This is the same as the original S5 and S1H, though unlike the S5, you can toggle between the two different base ISOs in the camera's menu system now, which does limit your ISO ranges depending on what base you choose, as well as just having it in an auto mode where it will automatically turn on as you go up the ISO range. As you go through the range in auto mode, you can see a clear step at ISO 4000. When we look at 640 and 4000 in Vlog, we can see that the noise profile is very similar, which is good to see. When you're in the low mode, you can go up to 4000 and 5000 ISO, but this looks much worse than 4000 in the high mode. So if you want to shoot from 3200 ISO up, I would suggest switching to the high base mode and using 4000. However, for most people, shooting in the auto mode will make sure you get the best results most of the time. As you can on previous Panasonic cameras, you can go in and tweak the levels of noise reduction in all of the colour profiles, depending on how much noise you find acceptable versus detail. This will be a really good feature if you want to turn around your footage quickly without doing noise reduction in post. I've always personally really liked Panasonic's colour science, and the S5 II continues to produce the nice skin tone that they are known for. The S5 II has a range of photo styles or profiles that anyone who's shot with a Panasonic camera before will be familiar with. However, for most video users, there are only really a few worth exploring. Cinelight D2, Cinelight V2, Like 709, Vlog, HLG, and 10 custom profiles. This camera has full Vlog instead of Vlog L, which is good, and the custom profiles are great for you to tweak any of the profiles in the camera and then save them as your own versions while keeping the stock profiles stock. Like previous Panasonic cameras, the S5 II can have LUTs ingested into it, which can be used with the Vlog View Assist function if you want to just monitor your image with a LUT on it but record Vlog. However, the S5 II can also burn a LUT into your recorded footage. You can do this by importing a LUT into the new LUT library tab. This can either be a VLT or cube file. The S5 II can now ingest up to 10 LUTs, whereas previous Panasonic cameras could only handle 4. You can then head into the Photo Style tab and either use the new real-time LUT profile, or you can set up your own custom profile using your chosen photo style base and LUT. That way you can have multiple LUTs set up for different shooting situations. This will then burn your LUT into your footage, which will be really handy if you want to shoot using Vlog and know the LUT you want to use so you can turn around the footage faster in your edit. When it comes to recording formats, the S5 II is similar to the S5. All of the recording options in the camera use long op compression, whereas you will find intra-frame compression in higher end versions of Panasonic's cameras, like the GH6 and S1H. The S5 IIX, which we'll talk about in a bit, will have intra-frame recording. The camera can capture 6K 3x2 using the full width of the sensor up to 30p in 420 10-bit, DCI 4K or UHD up to 60p with an APS-C crop or 30p with no crop. All of the recording options are 10-bit, but what will change is your chroma subsampling, which can either be 420 or 422. In my eyes, 6K recording is a real sweet spot. I do wish that it recorded 422 in this mode though. Capturing at 6K allows for downsampling in post, or using the extra resolution to crop in, reframe and stabilise while still being able to deliver 4K. It also has an anamorphic recording format, which you can use with the range of different D-squeeze options in the camera. You of course have 6K 3x2, which can be used with full frame anamorphic lenses, and a 3.3K APS-C 4x3 mode, which you can capture up to 60p in. We managed to shoot some footage with the new Atlas Mercuries, which allowed us to shoot in the camera's 6K 3x2 mode. This paired with the 1.5 times squeeze of the lens results in a 2.25 to 1 aspect ratio, which you can then just easily manipulate into whatever format you want with the extra resolution you have as you are shooting in 6K. You can also define the squeeze factor when using the IBIS with anamorphic lenses, which is a really unique feature of Panasonic cameras and can result in some fantastic imagery. With how many awesome affordable anamorphic lenses are hitting the market now, how excellent Panasonic support is for anamorphic lenses is great to see, and means you can easily shoot with whatever lenses you want to. You can also adjust your sharpness in camera, and we can see a clear difference between 0 and 10, so you can really dial in how you want your footage to look depending on your taste. 0 will give you a more natural looking image, whereas more sharpness will give you a cleaner, more corporate kind of look. The camera can resolve detail well, but you can see some aliasing in the higher resolution areas of the image. As you go down in resolution, we can see clear steps in detail reduction, and more moire in the centre of our chart. The best looking image we managed to get with our chart was with the camera in DCI 4K mode outputting to our Ninja 5 Plus, which was recording ProRes 422 HQ. I'm intrigued to see what the camera can really do though with the addition of ProRes RAW output, though I would also love to see B-RAW as well. The S5 II has a slow and quick mode, which allows you to really dial up your frame rates. You can either easily see what modes have slow and quick options on the recording quality page in the camera, or just switch your mode dial to slow and quick, and then it will grey out everything that you can't use in slow and quick mode. When in this mode, you can shoot UHD or DCI 4K 420 10-bit long op up to 60 frames per second, but this mode does have an APS-C crop. You can also shoot 1080p 420 10-bit long op up to 180 frames per second using the full width of the sensor or with an APS-C size crop. The 4K 60p looks really good, and so does the APS-C crop 180 FPS Full HD, but the full frame 180 FPS doesn't look quite as good. I would have loved to have seen a full frame 4K 60 mode, but maybe Panasonic is saving that for their Mark II versions of the S1 and the S1H. At this price point though, this isn't too surprising to see, but it would have been nice to have the option. Panasonic have had some of the best, if not the best, stabilisation on the market for a while now, and the S5 II actually has a slightly reworked algorithm which Panasonic are calling Active IS. This isn't a new mode, you just need to turn on stabilisation and the new mode is enabled. Panasonic are claiming it's been mainly designed to improve performance while walking handheld, and that it's 200% better than the S5 was. So let's take a look at it. For our testing, we wanted to see how it compared to the Sony a7 IV. Both are using a Sigma 24-70 in their respective mounts, and are then attached to our trusty Hague twin mount. The S5 II is set to IBIS on, with no other stabilisation modes turned on, and the Sony has regular steady shot turned on as well. So they are both just using sensor stabilisation, no lens or boost modes at all. As you can see from the footage, there is a night and day difference between the two. The S5 II's performance is incredibly impressive across the different focal lengths and speeds that we tested. You could generally use some of these clips walking, which is more than I can say for the Sony, that doesn't look anywhere near as good. Lens IS being used on top of this should improve it even more, but what Panasonic have achieved with this system is truly impressive. You also have E-stabilisation and Boost IS, so we wanted to see these back to back as well, and again you can see just how fantastic each mode is in this more locked off style shot. One big improvement that the S5 II has seen over the original S5 is the change from a micro HDMI port to a nice full size HDMI. Micro HDMI is just flimsy and unreliable and awful, so this will be a fantastic addition for anyone who wants to use an external monitor regularly with the camera. When outputting via HDMI, you can choose to output info onto your screen or not, depending if you're recording externally. At release, the HDMI will not have the ability to output RAW. However, Panasonic will soon be enabling this via a paid firmware update. This will be using the already existing DMW SFU II key, which costs around £159. They haven't released any information about what resolution and frame rates it can output yet, but it will probably be quite similar to the last generation of cameras. The HDMI output does seem to have a little bit of latency on it though, which you can see here. As with any system designed for reliable professional video use, cooling the internals of the camera is crucial, and the S5 II uses a newly developed system to provide uninterrupted recording in environments up to 40 degrees. This new system uses a fan which is hidden up near the EVF, and you can see the exhaust vents around it here. This is actually really clever and means that no thickness has been added over the original S5, which is impressive given the S5 did have some recording time limitations. You can change the fan mode in the camera between several. During our time testing the camera, we didn't run into any overheating issues at all, and that was with the fan set to Auto 1. There is also a thermal management setting that allows you to change between a normal and high preset for the max recording temperatures. The S5 II features a 3.5mm microphone import that now allows you to go down to -18 dB, which is 6 dB less than the S5. If you require the ability to record better quality audio and use XLR microphones, you can use the same XLR1 unit that previous Panasonic cameras could use. When using this, you can switch your audio quality between 48 kHz 24-bit and 96 kHz 24-bit. The XLR1 will be a pretty key accessory for anyone who's primarily using the S5 II for capturing video and wants a better and easier audio workflow. As much as Panasonic have always positioned themselves more towards video users, the S5 II can also take some pretty decent stills. It's also seen some improvements when it comes to its drive modes, which you can see on the screen now. It performs and handles well as a stills camera, especially thanks to the improved autofocus system. Unsurprisingly, we couldn't open the RAW files in Lightroom, but the JPEGs we captured looked good. The fully weather-sealed body of the S5 II is very similar to the original S5, with really only a few key changes. In regards to I/O, it stayed the same other than the HDMI that we mentioned earlier. The USB-C can only be used for power input, which we used a good amount with our external power bank. It uses the same DMW-BLK22 battery that the S5 uses, and the battery grip from the S5 will also work. Battery life is decent, but if you want to run it off of external power, you have several ways of doing so, which is good. It uses a dual SD card slot, which has seen a slight update over the S5. Both slots are now UHS 2 compatible. It then features the same card recording functions as previous Panasonic cameras. On the back, not much has changed apart from an updated viewfinder, which is much better than the one found on the S5, and the rear joystick is now 8-directional, which means you can move it diagonally, which is good for focus point positioning. S5 cages unfortunately do not fit this camera, which means I'm sure we'll see all the regular cage brands putting them out for this camera very soon. The S5 II runs a very similar menu system to the ones found on existing Panasonic cameras such as the GH6. This means it's, not surprisingly, incredibly well featured, with loads of functions packed into it for both stills and video. Some of the key video functions being synchro scan, master pedestal level, the ability to use shutter angle and gain instead of speed and ISO, a focus limiter, focus peaking, a self-timer mode, focus transition, live cropping, the ability to toggle a solid range of exposure tools, a level gauge, frame and safety markers, and a bunch more. It's seriously crammed with stuff, and it's a really great operating system to navigate as well. The camera also features a set of custom modes. You can go into photo or video, set up everything as you want for that given preset, and then assign it to one of the available custom presets on the top dial, and then quickly and easily switch between them on the fly. Meaning you can easily have one for stills and then one for video, with no worrying about messing around with important changes like color profile and shutter speed. The Q menu is also really helpful for quickly adjusting key settings fast. And you can of course customize what you want to display on the Q menu, which is also really great to use. As Panasonic like to do, with the announcement of this camera, they've also announced that there will be 2 new firmwares for it in the future. At the moment, this includes the addition of HDMI RAW, which we mentioned earlier, and a live view composite mode that stacks light sources for astrophotography work. Fingers crossed we get to see them both come out soon. With the announcement of the S5 II, Panasonic also announced the S5 IIX. The X will be a higher end version of the S5 II, with blacked out branding to make it obvious which one is which. It also has a bunch of extra features packed into it, and this includes the ability to record ProRes externally via the USB-C to an external SSD, up to 800 megabits all-eye compression recording options, the ability to output RAW via HDMI, wireless and wired IP streaming, and USB tethering to a smartphone, all on top of the already excellent feature set of the S5 II. It'll be available May this year and will cost roughly £300 more than the S5 II, which is pretty good considering the raw output license for the S5 II is roughly £159. Which one out of the two makes the most sense for you to grab will depend on your needs. However, I think the X does offer a lot of extra features for video shooters, though you will have to wait obviously until May, but it's probably going to be worth it. At the roughly £2,000 price point, there are several options competing with the S5 II. You have the Sony a7 IV, FX30, the Canon R6 Mark II, Fujifilm X-H2 and X-H2S, and the GH6 from Panasonic. They all have different pros and cons depending on what you want from a camera. And we actually compared a good few of these cameras in this class in a previous video. We didn't include this or the R6 Mark II, so maybe it's worth us doing another video around this price point again. So let us know if you want to see that in the comments below. The Panasonic S5 II takes everything great from the original S5 and combines it with a range of great improvements. It finally brings in a new age of Panasonic cameras with the addition of phase detect autofocus, which was by far the biggest complaint people said about their cameras. This new phase detect system performs very well, and I can't wait to see other Panasonic cameras with this system come out, although I would love to see a face-only mode added. It has most likely the best IBIS system on the market, Panasonic's great looking colour science, solid dynamic range, good recording options, and a boatload of video functions crammed into it. The only compromises with the S5 II are that it's limited to IPB compression, has a crop in 4K 60, and a slower readout speed on the sensor than I would have liked to see. But for £2,000, it packs a whole lot of awesomeness into its well thought out body, and I think it's a fantastic option for the more video leaning hybrid shooter. Though for just £300 more, some filmmakers may want to wait for the X version if you require any of the features that we mentioned earlier. I can't wait to test out the X version as soon as I can to really see what this camera is capable of without the constraints of the internal recording formats. If you have any more questions or thoughts about the S5 II, let us know in the comments below. And if you like the video, please give it a like and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.